Welcome to The Women's Wisdom, our journey in emergency medicine podcast, a production of the Women in Emergency Medicine section of the American Academy of Emergency Medicine. Join Doctors Molly Estes and Liz Calhoun as they are joined by prominent women in emergency medicine and other special guests.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Women's Wisdom podcast. My name is Molly Estes. I'm clinical faculty at Northwestern University in Chicago, and I'm joined today by my co-host.
Hi, I'm Liz Calhoun, and I am an attending physician with Emergency Service Associates in Salisbury, Maryland.
And today we are very excited to welcome to this episode a good friend of ours and a friend of the Women in Emergency Medicine section, Dr. Jason Hine.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
We are very excited to have you. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Where do you work? What do you do?
Yeah, like you all, I'm an emergency medicine physician. Surprise. So I'm a doctor of emergency medicine. I live and work in Southern Maine. I went to Colby College. So that's how I got tied to the state, a Connecticut native. Then I went down and did Tufts Medical School and went to the beautiful Northern Philadelphia area for Temple training, where I cut my teeth there in some pretty awesome environment and decided to come back to live and work in a place where my kids could grow up safe and happy and away from the knives and guns that helped me get the ice in my veins for what I do. But so now I live and work here in Maine. Within my job, I'm what I'd call a community academic hybrid. I run the second year resident rotation at our community hospital. I'm a medical director of education for that Southern hospital, where I do faculty development for our staff throughout the hospital system. And then over the last year, I've become the assistant director of MITE, which is the Maine Health Institute of Teaching Excellence. So helping clinicians throughout the system better themselves in academia, teaching, all that stuff. So love education, love that world, love the mix between that and doing what I do in the ER.
So only about a half a dozen hats there that you just rattled off and listed. One of our questions that we always love to ask our guests to get the conversation started, particularly since we have so many students and young trainees who like to listen to our podcast, is what got you interested in this emergency medicine pathway to begin with?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think my answer generally is the fact that I've loved all of medicine, right? I went through my rotations as a third year, fourth year, and I came in from a sports background. I came in, of course, thinking I was going to be an orthopod. I don't think I bench press enough, a little bit too small in that space, so I had to move on with life, but found that I loved it all. I love psychiatry, weirdly. I love OBGYN. That was the other field that I thought about going into. And I loved internal medicine and surgery. But I found on those rotations, when I got to where I could plan out my day to the 15-minute mark of we're going to round till this time, and then I'm going to have to do X, Y, or Z, and I'll have lunch for this very short moment. And I had it dialed in. That became mundane to me. I like the unexpectedness of emergency medicine, the fact that we get our hands dirty, but we're also diagnosticians. All of that stuff really rung true for me. So the fact that I liked everything within the medical field, that we see all of that, and we get to be these sleuths of medicine, that we're some of the few true last diagnosticians. Many other specialties will probably scoff at that idea, but all of that led me down this path to be an ER doc.
And as someone who also trained at Temple, I can say that we do certainly lean heavy on the procedure-based part of the specialty, which makes a lot of sense if you were interested in OBGYN and orthopedics. Is that what led you to practice community medicine, so you could keep your hands physically in the practice as well?
I think that my interest to be in the community was that same idea of wanting to get out, do work where I built my own foundation, my own skill, maintain myself. And as much as I work also at our Ivory Tower Institute for that exposure, I wanted to be able to keep my skills up. And I learned pretty quickly skills fade and they fatigue no matter how well trained you come out of residency. But I wanted to be on the ground, seeing all patients, making sure I'm maximally efficient, that I'm keeping my skills up, and not ever have that period of time where I'm only practicing with or through residents.
It's a pretty admirable goal. I can say, at least for myself, I'm only doing academia. I have definitely gone through periods of life where I start to question everything about, wait, do I still remember how to do this? And then I'll get into the sim lab or have a critical patient or some other situation where I'm put on the spot. I find that it's even worse if you haven't done something in a while, and then all of a sudden you're the backup of the backup responsible for trying to get the procedure done. So I think that you've arranged quite an interesting practice for yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And as much as you would imagine maybe that practicing in the community might be the cure all for some of that, but it's really not. I have found like you have to keep practicing, you have to keep yourself in the sim lab or doing other types of reviews and that type of work. And so that's been another kind of area of interest for me, is growing and understanding how we all learn and forget. And so that's another area that I've put a different hat on and loved engaging myself in learning about too.
More than just learning about, you've turned it into an entire entrepreneurship. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you ended up developing your own company?
Yeah, just the quick background there. The company is SimKit, and it's basically trying to have people have access to procedural training, removing a lot of the barriers that I have encountered and a lot of us encounter. And it actually came out of a case, interestingly. Same idea, trying to keep my skills sharp, keep myself fresh, and see different practice environments. About 3, 4 years out of residency, I was doing moonlighting in, I'll just say, northern Maine, doing one of those 24-hour shifts, doing different practice environment, not 20 minutes down the road from the ivory tower where I can transfer people in, hopefully as needed. It's kind of solo coverage, have to handle it all on your own. And had a reasonably busy day there. It was my second shift at this critical access hospital. It was like 10:30 p.m. I was hoping to settle down because it's a 24. You work hard and then hopefully you sleep for the rest of that income. A radio call for a patient who had covered themselves in gasoline and self-ignited as a suicide attempt, and to expect a difficult airway. So yeah, that was my welcome to the show of remote access hospital care. I had to provide care for that individual, incredibly sick, as one would imagine, covered in third-degree burns, kind of head, chest, neck, all of that area, airway edema to the level of able to get the bougie, just like the tip of the bougie through what was the remnants of vocal cords, but of course couldn't get any tube to pass through that same space. And so ended up having to do a cricothyrotomy, second shift, didn't know anybody, didn't know what was going on in that environment. And with that, as much as the procedure was successful, patient survived, even went on to talk about like, when are we going to have to do fasciotomies and escharotomy type work. It was a wild case. I felt on the other side weirdly lucky that the case went as well as it did. The 3 years from training, I mentally practiced crike on my own, thought I was doing okay in that space, and realized that I needed to get my hands on some procedural training again. And so started building for myself some models, just basement MacGyver work to create some models for myself, and expanded it from crike into some others, and realized that what I was creating I thought could be valuable for other people, especially being a dad. I got 3 kids at home and they were doing their Kiwi crates. I'm like, what a cool concept to just have a monthly STEM, right? Have them building little models or robots or catapults. Why can't we do that with what we do in emergency medicine? Get all those barriers out of the way, get a box in the mail once a month, dust off a halo procedure, and continue on with your life. And so from that, SimKit was born.
Man, I wasn't building robots when I was a kid, so your kids sound way smarter already. Next generation comments here. But you have this brainchild for this company. You do not have an MBA, correct?
No, I do not.
So how in the world did you go about building a business from the ground up?
Yeah, great question. I wish I had thought of how to answer that question before I started building a company. Yeah, I think it's a little bit of what we're in emergency medicine. You got to be pretty comfortable being uncomfortable, obviously, in a lot of the work that we do, and being willing to dive into something with an unknown. And I came into the idea recognizing I had a lot of unknown unknowns of how to do this type of work. And so I enrolled myself in some entrepreneurial courses, longitudinal courses with other people that were trying to build products and ideas, developed some mentors to fill in some gaps of what were my skill set lacks or lackings, and then built a team around myself as I found people to fill in the areas that I was not good at. And so it was learning on the fly, but also I think, if I could say, just being humble enough to recognize I don't know this, or I suck at this and I need to learn how to do it or find someone who can. That was a lot of my approach, being very not afraid, but aware of I'm a doctor. I don't know a lot of these things. And so by finding other people to teach me, and there's a lot of in many states and particularly around cities, there's a lot of entrepreneurial energy if you start just looking into it. You start finding communities, you start finding programs. Like for me, it was called the Top Gun program here in Maine for people who want to build companies. And so leaning into that, going into a space that I didn't know, but just feeling like I had a cool concept, cool idea, and a pain point for people like myself that I wanted to address, and just kind of having to persevere through the growing pains of learning something that I've never thought about before.
What was the hardest part of getting this off of the ground for you? Because it sounds to me like you really took your time and said, I need to do a little bit of self-directed learning. I know I don't have the background to get this off the ground, but I have this great idea. But in every new experience, there's always some stumbling blocks. What was the part that you struggled with the most?
I think the hardest thing for me is, and this is starting to get into some of the business lingo, you start with this minimal viable product, they call it, right? Your MVP. You don't start with the full catalog of what Apple has to offer. You start with your laptop, you start with your home computer. And so that was a challenge. I wanted to have 12 procedures ready to go with sim models and boxes for all of that. And it's just that's such a massive undertaking. We're still building to that now. We're rolling out our second 4 procedures in a month or two. So realizing we have to start small, start with your minimal viable product, get models and good education for what you can start and then grow. And so wanting to hit the ground with this Rolodex of awesome education and knowing that in emergency medicine, there's so many procedures that we have to brush up on, but that you have to do it in bite-sized chunks. That was hard for me to swallow, but we went rolling and have been building from there.
Now, if there's one thing that we know really well in emergency medicine, it's that anything is a team sport. And you mentioned needing to find a lot of other people to help fill in where either you didn't have the expertise or the knowledge, et cetera, et cetera. Who are some of the other people who make up your team, and what are those gaps that you found for them to fill?
Yeah, great question. There's a lot of gaps, right? Because I'm a doctor and I'm not a business guy. I guess I am now, kind of. But the first area for me was getting into IP, intellectual property. And so finding someone that can help me understand what a patent is, what copyrights are, when you need them, when you don't, and then helping me protect what I'm creating. So creating models de novo, things that are small, portable, obviously can fit into a box and be used in that way, not Trauma Man 5000 who's $25,000. So we're building that type of stuff, and having someone help me learn what is IP was my first step. And then as much as I think of myself as an educator, and I believe myself to be one, there's other people that are also more talented in understanding CME and the ins and outs of accreditation processes. And so my first partner developing in this was someone who has educated physicians for 20 years or so to help that other side of understanding how doctors work.
That sounds like you put a lot of time and energy and investment into this. But at the same time, we heard you mention that you are a dad and you clearly still are very involved in clinical practice. How do you find balance in your life with a major business, a full-time job, and whether you work full-time hours or not, let's face it, our job is full-time stressful, and then having a home life as well?
I like to tell my trainees that balance is not a binary state. It is a constant, is a constant balance.
And
Yeah.
struggle. Yeah. No, I started leaning into, and yes, I'm proud to be able to say that I'm still a full FTE clinician while being a dad, being a partner, and being an entrepreneur. And so that has been a struggle. There's times where the scales, to Molly's point, they just tip in the wrong direction, and you need to balance those scales again. The big thing for me is starting to get into understanding how my brain works. And the first step there was David Allen's Get Things Done, like understanding how people can organize themselves to be, his catchphrase, I believe, is the art of stress-free productivity. I still haven't gotten to that point yet, but yeah, the concept of work is work. Time dedicated to your job is one of your boulders. Let me take a step back on that. I have a global thought of life as a barrel, and you fill the barrel with things, right? And you have to put in a whole bunch of stuff. There's these giant rocks, there's smaller rocks, and then there's the sand. And so the boulders, when I just like naturally reference a boulder, those are the things in my mind that you cannot compromise. They have to be in the bucket. They have to be in the barrel. They're part of your life. And without them, your life would not be complete. So that for me is family, my physical mental health, some type of cognitive engagement like SimKit. And so those boulders have to go into the barrel first. And then you add the smaller rocks, and then you add the gravel, and then you add the sand, and eventually you have a full bucket. But not compromising on the boulders for me is a really big part of trying to keep that flow, keep that balance, and keep myself healthy. So going back to David Allen, it's having a calendar where I can, at the start of a week, I start on Sunday, I look at my shifts. I look at when and around my shifts I can get a workout in. I look and see when can I relieve my wife so that I can spend time with my kids and she can get her things done. And then I look for like times for myself to do SimKit and other stuff like that. And so that's how I try to strike that balance. It's not always easy. I was saying the scales tip one way or the other. It tends to lean. If someone else were filling your barrel, it'd be full of goddamn sand. All that other stuff would occupy your life, but you just need to constantly fight for the ones that are important.
I will say I've always loved that particular analogy of the boulders or the large rocks or however you're going to phrase it in the barrel or the cup or the jar. It has always been a gentle but firm reminder to me to occasionally reevaluate and make sure that the right things in life are actually getting the right order of priority with all of the limited time that we have or don't have, as the case may be.
Yeah.
So we have heard about the advent of SimKit, and we've heard about the never-ending struggle for balance. But out of any new endeavor in life comes new opportunity, right? What have you learned from starting your own business, or where do you see it going in the future? What continues to occupy your interest and make you decide to continue this crazy journey that you have started down?
Oh, yeah. How many hours is this podcast and what I've learned? We got 4 or 5 to go.
We'll make it a series.
The first thing I learned, we talked about in terms of having the willingness to say, I don't know, right? The teach thy tongue to say, I know not. And that requires some humility. Like, what the hell is anyone talking about in this lecture that we're doing? I need to dive more into it. Then for me, a lot of the learning was about what cognitive science teaches us in how we learn, because we want people to be efficient with their time, right? If you're going to be spending 30 minutes with our product, that product better hit home. It better teach you something. So we don't trivialize the ask of people to do long-term learning for their patients, for their procedural skills and that stuff. So cognitive science of spaced repetition and stress inoculation and generative learning and all of that. And the newest area for me now is learning a little bit more about the science of habit, almost, if you will. Because if you think about learning halo procedures and how we all talk, and you hear podcasts on the topic of spaced repetition, small aliquots, that's great. And we're all well-intentioned to do that type of work. But how do you actually make that happen? So learning from habit education, habit, and then cognitive science of like how to actually develop a long-term routine, particularly one that's not every day, right? It's challenging enough to say I'm going to go for a 20-minute run every day. But everyday activities are actually a little easier to develop a habit for. To have a habit that you do once a month is really tough. So learning how to help people do that is our kind of current area of learning.
I definitely understand that. I'm someone who's run for years and can't bring myself to do a 20-minute run once a month, let alone once a day. And so keeping up that habit once a month is certainly a challenge. Is there any big takeaway you can share about what makes someone able to effectively start a new habit infrequently, but keep it at the forefront of their mind?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of concepts. I think I could probably narrow it down to a handful. I'll do it particularly from the lens of the halo procedure, if that's okay. So I think the first thing that I recognize as a barrier for myself and for others is in medicine, we're all grown or molded or shaped into these perfectionistic people or perfectionists, right? To go through college and go post-bac and then get all these scores. And then medical school is just a constant grind toward molding you into being perfect. And that has succeeded. That has led us to achieve what we've achieved, being able to be clinicians. But to do this type of work, if you think about your goal of having, I'm going to do 30 or 45 minutes or an hour once a month or every other week of halo training, and I'm going to do it for the rest of my career. So the idea of good enough being better than nothing, anything being better than nothing for this type of work is a new concept for me. And the idea, again, of getting past where good enough doesn't cut it in our career, right? You're expected to have less than a 2% risk of a MI in a patient before you can feel like it's safe to send them home. We have to be, in other ways, you're saying that we have to be 98% perfect. In this situation, if you're like, I don't have all of my procedures together. I don't have all of my time slots. I don't have all of my simulation models, but I'm going to spend 20 minutes today reviewing transvenous pacing and taking detailed notes, or taking out my pacer in my department and playing with it while I watch a video. That's so much better than where you were before you actually engaged in that small activity. So I think this idea that anything is better than nothing is my new phrasing for that, to help people say it's okay to not be perfect in this. It's okay to start small and do it for a month, and then you miss a month, but then you come back month 3 and you just keep trying to build that structure for yourself. So giving yourself some grace, stop trying to be perfect, and just start trying to be okay, more than what you are right now in terms of practicing procedures.
I think that messaging is so important in so many different aspects of our lives, right? To our learners out there, hey, guess what? Some multiple choice questions are better than none. Part of the chapter is better than reading nothing. For me right now, in my current health focus, hey, some home cooked meals are better than no home cooked meals, right? Some
Yeah.
vegetables are better than no vegetables. But I think you're right. We managed to fool ourselves into thinking that unless we can do it all at once, all at the same time, 100% totally perfectly, then we are automatic failures, or where do we even start? And a huge part of any habit is changing your mentality and just taking that first step. So I guess to maybe begin to close our conversation, if somebody out there has an idea that they are thinking about pursuing, but it seems too big, too insurmountable, too much outside their area of expertise, what would be your pearl of wisdom for them, or your word of encouragement, or your impetus to pass along to just simply start, to take that first step, to go down the anything better than nothing pathway?
Yeah. Oh man, that's a fantastic question. And I think that the first thought I have is, if you're in our space, which I know we're talking to clinicians for the most part, we're talking to students or physicians, get over our perfectionism. Get over that idea that I might fail, because yeah, it may very well. If you have a concept that you've had in the back of your mind from even a medical device, or a cool way to educate somebody, or a cool podcast idea, right? The idea of starting, and if you start and you fail, so much better than having that back of the napkin drawing of that device that you just never bring to fruition. If you think about your career close, when you hang up your stethoscope, what are the things that you're going to say, I wish I had done? And write that answer down, even write those 2, 3 answers down, and find the one that you want to dive into first. And then know that you are so well suited for that endeavor. We are naturally comfortable with uncertainty to a degree, certainly in medicine. So you have that skill set in you that you might not recognize already, and you can extend it to other areas, because we can be quick learners. We are self-motivated learners, and we are comfortable being uncomfortable. And so leaning into it a bit, just take that bit of a step into the waters, and you'll be surprised by your own abilities, your own competence, because of what you already do. So I would give people the general thought that you're already better at it than you might think when you're diving into something new in that way, because of what you do already.
That is such an important concept for all of us to remember, as I remember, especially as a new learner, but as an adult too, tackling something new, even just the smallest change can seem insurmountable. And it's really easy to forget that we're physicians. We already have the skill set to be here and to tackle something new. And all we need to do is acknowledge that and take the first step.
I'm with you for sure. And we do it regularly. If you think about it, again, in medicine, like if you've been like, all right, I've done fascia iliaca, but let's try a pang block. Man, you're diving in. You're like, I'm going to learn something brand new, whether it be tactile or cognitive. We are doing that type of work on a regular basis because of the ever-shifting way medicine happens. And you can do it in that passion, that idea that concept that you have that kind of keeps coming up again and again, but you have those trepidations. Throw caution to the wind a little bit and give it a go. Remember your boulders when you start that type of project. Maybe write down again, these are my non-negotiables so that they don't get swept away, but otherwise just lean into it. It's really fun.
To blatantly steal a very famous quote, you're braver than you believe, stronger than you seem, and smarter than you think.
That was
So,
me, right? I think
oh
I
yeah,
said that.
absolutely. Don't you remember when you told me that?
Yeah, that was how we opened. Before we started recording, I said that.
Well, Jason, thank you so much for taking time to add in this little grain of sand, or perhaps even a piece of gravel, if we're lucky, into your bucket of tasks to do this week. It's been really wonderful chatting with you and getting to hear more about what makes you you.
Thank you guys so much. It's just like a privilege to be across the mic from you guys and talk with your audience. So I'm very much appreciative of the time you guys gave me. Thanks.
And for those of you who have not heard this yet, Jason and I have a second podcast together. I joined him on his SimKit podcast, where we talk more about Halo procedures, critical access, and bravery in the setting of unknown environments and very sick patients. So come and take a listen to that. We will link to the podcast in the notes for this one.
And to all of our listeners out there, we'll catch you next time on our next episode. Take care, everyone.
We hope you have enjoyed this podcast from the American Academy of Emergency Medicine. AAEM is a nonprofit professional association of over 8,000 emergency physicians dedicated to board certification and democratic group practice. For more information about AAEM, visit our website at www.aaem.org.